NetSparker, the developers of a comprehensive automated web security platform that includes web vulnerability scanning, assessment, and management. NetSparker's desktop and cloud-based security solutions employ a unique and dead-accurate vulnerability scanning engine that automatically verifies vulnerabilities and provides a proof of concept. For more information, visit them on the web at securityweekly.com/NetSparker. The average large enterprise has 24 million vulnerabilities. The good news is only 5% will probably be exploited. But which 5%? That's where Kenna comes in. Kenna Security's modern vulnerability management technology combines real-time threat intelligence, data science, and automated risk analysis to prioritize the vulnerabilities that pose the biggest threat to your organization. Team up with Kenna Security and make the most of your limited resources. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Kenna Security. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. I do have an announcement. I was totally unprepared to read said announcement, and now I have to fill time as my teleprompter scrolls through, and we will get to privacy and Bubblewrap. But if you want to stay in the loop, all things Security Weekly, visit securityweekly.com/subscribe. Subscribe on your favorite podcast catcher or our YouTube channel. Sign up for our mailing list and join our Discord server. Also, if you missed Security Weekly Unlocked, you can now access all of the content on demand, whether you registered before the live event or not, by visiting securityweekly.com/unlocked and clicking either the button to register or the button to log in. And with that, we'll talk about the security news for this week. I did want to start, first of all, by saying how jealous I am that one day, because on my bucket list is appearing on Darknet Diaries podcast, John Strand and Jeff Mann have lived out my dream of appearing on the Darknet Diaries podcast, and I have not yet listened to it, Jeff, but it's in the queue.
Shame on you. Well, you've heard the story. I don't think that there's anything new to learn, but every time I tell the story, I remember some little different tidbit. Yeah, so you might pick up on something.
And who? So Jack interviewed you and who else for this episode?
Marcus Carey.
Marcus Carey. Yeah, I'm excited to listen to that.
Yeah, it's I've gotten a lot of feedback on the Twitters and the LinkedIn's. People saying, "Oh, this is the best episode yet," that kind of thing. So,
nice.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's other people who are like, "Oh my gosh, a bunch of old people talking."
It was totally the best episode because Marcus was on it.
I am a big
definitely
fan.
Been that. What a great episode! Thanks, Jack and Marcus.
I am a big fan of Jeff and Marcus and the Darknet Diaries. So,
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely,
definitely something I'm looking forward to.
No, it was fun, and I've got my own. They have unique art for every episode, so I've got cool. I forget. He tells who his artist is. I forget. I apologize off the top of my head. But
it looks like a lot of smoke, and I think there was a particular kind of smoke that maybe was emanating when the person wrote this next article titled "Why Privacy Is Like Bubblewrap." Like I really, woo! Not the easiest article to read. The author has great, inspiring ideas. The writing style was a little tough for me to overcome, but don't let that get in the way of the ideas. And there is a very lengthy first part of the article that talks about language and linguistics, and finally they get to the point of why privacy is like Bubblewrap. And the article states, in a sense, we should think of privacy as not as something that resides in an individual, but something that surrounds them. Oh, that was my first wow. Okay. This is where the bubble wrap metaphor comes in, a layer that is transparent enough to allow you to be seen, but also a protection against harmful intrusion. The more bubble wrap, the more protection, but also the greater degree of constriction. Sure, I can wrap bubble wrap around my experience online. I can have no cookies, no tracking, use Proton Mail, etc., but it's going to be a slower, more plodding experience, which has its own costs. That was interesting article.
I find it interesting that one of the section headers is words have meaning or meanings, and yet we continuously struggle within our industry to come up with definitions of terms that are fundamental to our industry.
Mm-hmm.
Privacy being one of them.
For sure.
It's like Bubblewrap.
It is. It's like Bubblewrap. Mm-hmm. I thought it was an interesting
and parfaits
take on that. I think many of us in security have gone through, especially as security professionals. Seemingly, we know better, but have always we strike this balance between, yes, I know it's hard to use PGP, but I'm going to try and use it anyway. But maybe I'm not, because it's like really hard to use, right? And I think it's really also that struggle between security and convenience. Yeah. And then because what he's alluding to privacy as well is that there's a similar struggle between privacy and convenience. I think we interviewed Michael Bazell. He talked about some of the great lengths that he goes through and advises his clients go through to have some anonymity and privacy, but also the inconvenience factors that one can encounter. I know some people like that they spin up a separate email address for everything they sign up for. And there's we know of these tricks, but oftentimes, even for ourselves, it might be an inconvenience to do some of those things. And we make, I think, every day, us consciously, maybe more so than others, the decisions to protect what we believe is more important. Of course, and then, as that's a parallel to any organization, what's important and what's not is up for debate. When we look at our own OPSEC, which ties into another story, we have to evaluate what's important and still strike that balance between security and convenience. And I think we all know the folks that go to that extreme, and I respect them greatly in protecting their security and privacy, much to the deficit of some of their convenience, and maybe spend more time. Whereas some of us are like, it's a risk decision. Maybe I want to spend more time learning how to build things and do other things than having my own mail server versus using someone else's, right? Now, today, I think largely it's hosted, email. That was one of the debates, I think, between that security and convenience, right, Larry, where I think your company went through this, right, between we're going to host our own email infrastructure because it's more secure, but at a certain point, we're like, wait, how much time are we spending on that? Like, that's,
absolutely. And, I do the same thing. You know what? The joke that, the cobbler's kids always have the worst shoes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, same thing. Like, I had a website for hacksthematrix.com and a few other places, and like, shit, I'm just, like, I gotta maintain a server, and I gotta make sure the firewall rules, and I gotta patch it, and I gotta update it. I'm gonna move all that stuff to AWS.
Yeah.
Sure, it costs me like $3 a month, but I was probably paying that in electricity and just time.
Maybe it's 12, but yeah, like I subscribe to a service today that does website monitoring.
Yep.
And pulls keywords. And I'm like, yes, I can totally write a Python script to do this. I'm like, but you know what? I've written those Python scripts quite a few times in the past. And I'm like, it's not really exciting to me, first of all, to go write that, because like it's not exciting because I've done it before.
Yep.
And I'm like, for what I pay for a dedicated instance would be $10 a month, and this service was $7 a month. However, the interesting part is they don't do it as well as I believe I can do it. So now I'm like, you know what? I'm probably going to go off and do it myself. And really, this is just so I can scrape web pages when new items like AMD processors and NVIDIA RTX 30 series come available, because I really want that stuff. And I just want to know. And the email notification is too slow. This is, segues into a whole other conversation of like, why aren't you filtering for bots, because that's a solvable problem, and why aren't you letting like paying customers get first dibs on the stuff when it comes available? And why, when you're going to notify me that something's available, you're sending me an email, and by the time I get to the site, it's too late, it's already gone.
Yep.
I hate that. As a customer, it irks me.
I was thinking before you brought it up, the whole thing about the convenience versus security, whatever that phrase means, what those types of phrases are called. But in it, not to dwell on it, but the whole definition and meaning of words, even convenience doesn't really capture all the nuances that people experience, because it is that. It is the people that would just rather plow through. But I almost wonder if like a term like expediency is not more appropriate, because
efficiency it plays into there too, right?
Or
is what
efficiencies, because sometimes you just got to get something done. Sometimes you and usually and very often it's the people that know better that take the shortcuts and do what they do the thing that they know that they shouldn't do. I don't know what you call that, but at the time it seems like the right thing to do. It's a risk,
right? It is,
and it's a business risk decision.
But so remember, there was a brilliant engineer. Remember Brandon, and he would poke. I don't know. He was friends with Twitchy back in the day. Yeah, Brandon was brilliant enough that he could run Gen 2 on his laptop, compile the kernel, and do it. I'm like, dude, props to you. And he poked fun of me because like I ran a Mac, but this is the same conversation we're having now. I'm like, I don't know that I want to spend that much time with Gen 2 on my laptop.
Right.
I got other things that I want to do. And
exactly.
And to your point, Jeff, that's not necessarily convenience. That's more of a time management kind of thing as well, which plays into it. So
it's like I haven't mowed my lawn in like 7 years because we have Lawn Guy to come do that.
Yeah.
Because I think about
those decisions.
What it costs me in time to mow the lawn versus not being able to do those other things because I have to mow the lawn. And it's just me that mows the lawn, and by the time I'm done, it's like 6 hours.
Right. Now,
but the lawn guy comes in for like $150 with 3 guys and does all of it. And you know what? While he's doing that, I'm doing this other thing that I really needed to do.
And what's ironic today is I run Ubuntu on all my systems, so I mean, there's that. It is not Gen 2.
No, it's not.
But I think, if I may, I think the nuance that we don't often talk enough about is because we have these illustrations, we have these analogies, but I think the conclusion that we always draw to is you should know you should have known better, you shouldn't do that, at least from the one perspective. But I think the thing that we should talk, and we don't have to do it in the news segment, but it'd be an interesting conversation to have sometime, is given that that's more or less a reality, that for expediency's sake, for economic reasons, whatever it is, that's the way it's going to be. Then how do you do security, and what do you do given that circumstance to still try to maintain a secure environment? Because it's my whole idea that vulnerabilities are here to stay. What else in the risk equation is something that we could focus on and dwell on, and maybe gain some traction and have some perception of we're secure.
Tyler?
I think the problem is it comes down to what is our real risk, does it really matter? Like, you start to think about how, like, the email server is a great example, like how much visibility. There's a paradigm shift there where Google has all these resources that they're devoting people looking at it and doing security things better than you would be able to do.
Yep.
They have more manpower, more money. So take that and shift to where Jeff's at. Like, okay, so say we do move there, what are the things that we can control? And then what do we actually give up by moving to that? Which there is always a trade-off there. I don't care what platform you're on, you are losing privacy. But at the end of the day, what is your threat? What is your threat factor? What is your business risk from a personal standpoint? And can you really do anything about it from, the things that are going on today, like nation state? You're not going to stop a nation state. I don't care who you are. Privacy from telemetry data or ad tracking data. I don't care how vigilant you are. Like, if you have a cell phone, if you have a product with inside any kind of modern technology in your house, or your family does, you're tracked and you're very well known to these companies. So that goes back to, what is the point of not having these tailored ads that, may be relevant to what you are looking at? Like, is there a point? What is the business risk? What's the trade-off?
Well,
and then how does that paradigm shift happen?
Oculus is an interesting example in the context of what you're saying, Tyler, right? Because there are some security professionals that have put out on public forums that I won't use an Oculus because I don't want to give up my data. I don't want Facebook to know what games I'm playing. And I'm like, really? Because, like,
do you care?
First, do
they not already know?
Yeah, and secondly, like, someone already knows what games you're playing, right? Like,
I mean, do you have an iPhone or an Android phone? Is Siri on? And if you have it disabled, do you really think that Siri's not listening, capturing the gaming talk that you're talking about? So at the end of the day, like, it comes down to how much you actually know about what's being tracked and where it's being tracked from, and whether or not you care if it's being used in that manner.
after the whole Parler thing, there were some folks that were fielding questions, and were like, I don't want to use Amazon, and I want to go to any site that's hosted on Amazon, and I don't want to use any Apple or Google product. And it's like, well, you better be really good with Linux. And then even at that, think about, I said on a previous show this week, I'm like, every time I run an APT update, I'm like, oh, look at all that crap coming down. Like, I wonder if that's trustworthy. Right at the end of the day, you're going to trust someone else somewhere. But getting out of the Apple and Google is hard. There was another tech journalist that was like, well, I just blocked all AWS. Like, anything was on AWS, I blocked it. And they're like, that really sucked. I had to turn it back on, right?
That's like, you're looking at almost 85% of the market of what we use commercially is on some cloud service, whether it's AWS, Google Cloud Platform, or Azure.
Yep.
It's going to be on one of those. There's nothing you can do about that. And on top of that, those aren't really the ones I'd be worried about. Honestly, the ad tracking stuff for your cell phone and Siri and the sites that you're visiting, regardless of where you think you are, you're probing wireless networks. You got Bluetooth on. Every time you pass things, every time your wife says something or you mention something in the house, Siri picks it up, Alexa picks it up. Like, literally, we're in an age where privacy in and of itself, in the form that we thought of privacy 5 years ago, does not exist.
Nope. I feel like, I don't have any data to back this up. My wife and I both feel this way, that we trust Amazon and the Alexa platform way less than Google. I don't know if there's any science behind that. Is that. I don't know, but I just feel creeped out as to all the things that Amazon is doing with the Alexa platform and some of the products I think that they've said they're adding to it. Granted, you have some control. I don't even like to have the calling feature on there, even though I turned it off when we had those devices, and almost 100% I've decommissioned all of those devices. I feel creeped out as to the features and functionality they're putting in there. So we went to Google because I'm like, well, I've got a Pixel, so I use a Google phone. So I'm like, if I have Google devices, like, I'm not at any much more risk, I think, than not using that stuff. I don't know.
I mean, those are psychological. Like, you take enough of those psychological gut reactions, what we call intuition, and those are just basically machine learning of little correlated pieces of data that we have not yet drawn a conclusion to. And there's an entire field of study on this that's fascinating. But there are reasons behind some of those intuitions around different companies and platforms, and most of them are fairly correct. You are trading one evil for another evil. Who owns what and what they do with it. It's capitalism at the end of the day. They're all there to make money. They're all going to utilize you to do it.
Facebook has is that an assistant? What is Facebook's assistant called? I don't remember now. Because I'd never use it because I don't trust Facebook at all. But yet I use Facebook, so.
Yep.
They have
and that's the thing is, even if you were to try and, like, be more privacy concentric, right? The fact that you have signed up for these at one point in time, or the EULA has changed and you've agreed to someone's EULA, whether it's your computer, your laptop, your mouse, your webcam, like, all of these things have an EULA that are collecting data. Like, you have these accounts and that data is pretty well known. Your lifestyle doesn't change all that much from what matters to you. So you can't retroactively go back and remove your data very easily. So it comes back to not having been privacy concentric from the beginning of time. Does it actually matter what you're doing now? If you flip 180 degrees, hop off all the platforms, do a remove request through GDPR or one of the other mechanisms, that data and what's known about you, it's still there.
I think we can still draw lines, though. We have rules in the house that my wife and I have collectively established that there will be no video camera systems in anyone's bedroom or anyone's bathroom. And this ties into one of your stories, Larry, that I did read as well. I just think that's a good practice.
I mean, you're basically pulling in your core center of trust. You've had to go all the way down to bathrooms and personal space bedrooms.
Right.
Like, literally, that's probably about what we control, even at our house level. Like, sidewalks, your neighbor's ring, the Wi-Fi that bleeds over. Like, you're literally probably confined down to that concentric
like
ring of
cameras
of
today.
trust.
I mean, you can't put a camera. I went with your recommendation, right? I get the Rio Link, and I
Link, yeah.
and I put those in the front of my house, and like to my neighbors, I'm like, I'm sorry. I mean, I put a camera, and like I can see your house as clear as day. Like I showed them the camera, and they're like, actually, that's a good thing, because if there's ever an issue, like we know there's coverage. And I'm like, I did that for our safety, and hey, if you ever need the footage, if something happens, I'm happy to share it with law enforcement and help out.
That's another trade-off, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Like you have a security and you have certain conveniences and protections that these technologies are providing at the cost of maybe a little bit of privacy. But
Yeah, and I'm like, please don't stand
we gotta
naked
weigh
in the
this.
don't stand naked in the front of your house. I think that should go without saying, right?
Unless they're exhibitionists, and then,
No.
well, then
That's what the backyard is for.
That's what the backyard's for. Can't see in your backyard. Don't want to. But there was a story. ADT was a basically insider threat, and that person was. They called it hacking. I don't. Was it really? Was it password?
well, so there was the insider threat, and then there was a bunch of other ones that found that there was other stuff that they could do.
But it was like a ridiculously long time that this employee had basically been accessing cameras, but apparently these cameras were in people's bedrooms. Again, goes back to our rule, like no camera technology whatsoever in anyone's bedrooms or bathrooms is the rule. But apparently other people obviously knowingly had ADT install this in their homes. Is that a thing? I don't know.
I don't know.
I mean, if you want to
Apparently.
like watch your kids, right? And it's
Like
just
nanny
like
cam
you get
type.
you get like 5 camera bundle. Like we want to watch our safe in the bedroom or the guns or the jewelry. Like I guess
Yeah.
maybe, I don't know. That seems a little odd to me, but
Right. But apparently this person was accessing the camera footage in people's bedrooms and like basically watching them have sex in the bedrooms.
I'm curious why we don't have least privilege. Like this goes back to like this is a well-established company that like should know better, should have retroactively, if nothing else, like known to have granular controls around certain areas that are private. Like why would ADT in any situation need to be able to view live streams unless it's an alert goes off? Like there should be controls there. If alert goes off, trigger camera that allows one-time seated access through a credential proxy that grants access to this console at this time. Like that seems like a pretty straightforward programming mechanism and reassuring security control. Why is that not a thing?
So the employee facing up to 5 years in federal prison, accessing roughly 200 accounts more than 9,600 times over a 4.5-year period. To your point, Tyler, why didn't that throw up any bells, alarms, or whistles before 9,600 times, right?
Like he really needs to be challenged at work, and I don't know what he's doing because that seems like a lot of time.
Yeah, like 4.5 years. Like, what's the math on that? Like, how many times he was looking at these people's cameras? It doesn't say how long, but accessed them 9,600 times in a 4.5-year period.
That's a lot of spank revision right
That's
there.
a lot of like sitting there and looking at other people's cameras. Like, what else were you doing for those 4.5?
And how do you do that in an office space? Like, they
he was
not have
probably
like
doing it
people
after
next
hours.
to each other?
He's probably doing it after hours, at night, from the privacy of his own home. With all the
I go back to like
with all the
least
socks and bourbon,
privilege.
right? Yeah. So the ones that I had on the ADT,
Yeah,
stuff
you had a
were-
different one.
were,
I had the
were
one that they linked to this one that
Yep.
was the former ADT employee,
Yep.
but you had a different.
some technical ones. Specifically, if you knew the MAC address of the camera, the MAC address was used to authenticate to ADT's cloud service. If a password was set up on the camera, that was fine because the cloud service would respond back even if you used the wrong credentials. It was still largely based, from what I'm reading, it was still
security
basically
theater,
largely based on the MAC address. To the point that if you put in the wrong password, it would respond back with the correct one. So then you could get the real one. Yeah.
Interesting.
They've had this problem before though.
Yep.
Like, and they're not the only security or like camera company that does it this way. In fact, small access points, most IoT devices, there's a lot that use like libraries that are dedicated to doing it this way.
Yep. Shared libraries.
Well, because they don't want to deal with the support, basically.
Right.
What I'm getting from all this is that I should wrap my cameras in bubble wrap.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that would work.
I mean,
It would be blurry.
According to that article,
It'd be like trying to watch porn in the 90s when it was the
didn't
channel you had to
actually
pay
have
for, and it was kind of like that blurry.
Yep, and you had to like.
Sometimes you could see.
Yep. Sometimes
Imagination.
Boobs.
I think it was a boob. That was a boob.
Or was that just wavy lines? I don't know. Yeah. The other one was that the RTSP server on the cameras was unauthenticated.
Oh.
So if you're on the same network, you can just connect to the RTSP server.
Wait, what?
Yeah. The RTSP server on the cameras were unauthenticated.
And so anyone that knows how to use VLC
Yeah.
could stream the footage from your camera.
Yep. Yep.
In a quick Google search, it'll tell you how to do
forbid
that.
you got a bad wireless password, or a guest network, or WEP or WPS.
Yep. Next.
Next.
I don't.
Sudo.
Oh yeah.
I figured that'd be the big one.
The Baron Samedit.
Is it
Baron
sudo
Samedit.
or sudo?
Make me a sandwich.
It's sudo.
Sudo.
I thought it was sudo. I thought it was sudo because it was super user do.
I guess either is acceptable. And we've had these debates about
Sudio.
demon, whatever.
Studio.
Studio.
No.
So I fell on my dirt bike and lost a bunch of skin on my arm, and I've been putting this cream on it. Yeah, it's called pseudo cream, and I've always thought a great marketing slogan would be moisturizing at a higher privilege, but like only people like us would get it. But
Hey,
it does work really
too.
well. I mean, they're not a sponsor of the show, but props to Pseudo Cream. You can use that slogan with the nerds.
Oh, by the way, inappropriate.
Yeah, that was inappropriate. Yes.
No, it all depends on where you're moisturizing.
Where you're moist.
And
it
how
was
often.
my arm where I. Yes.
Yeah, it was with your arm. Yep. I swear, officer, I was just cleaning it and it went off.
That was inappropriate.
So we need to either replace or supplement the lube in the studio with a
Pseudo Cream.
jerry can of pseudo cream.
Yes.
There you go.
We're just filling time because I'll be honest with you. I tried to read the technical description of this at least 3 times, and I'm like, I have to read it again and really, really pay attention to this. I don't know if anyone else tried to get to the crux of the issue. This was, props to the person who discovered it, which I apologize, I don't know their name in front of me at the moment, but really, really awesome. I linked to an exploit. Oh, well, the exploit alert. It's a pretty good site, by the way. Links to it was Qualys that found it, and also I meant to look up what the reference was to Baron Samedit. Is that the person that found it, or is that a reference to something else?
That's the name.
That's the name of that they gave to this vulnerability, and it was found by Qualys. I suppose since Qualys is a sponsor, I should have reached out to them and will after this, but didn't have time to fully dig into this one like I should have. But basically, the high level, what I did get was any local user can exploit this, and it was introduced in July of 2011 and affects all legacy versions up to that point. They tested and were able to obtain full root privileges on Ubuntu 20.04 and Debian 10 and Fedora 33, and likely other operating systems are vulnerable. I updated Raspberry Pi today, and the only package that it updated, because I had updated previously not that long ago, was sudo.
So Baron Samedi, not Baron Samedit, is a spirit of Haitian voodoo. As the spirit of the dead.
Interesting.
I kind of this reminded me of what was the Bash shell vulnerability a couple years ago.
Yeah,
shell shock.
Yep.
We've been using Bash forever. Hackers love it. It's great. And then 20 years later, you find out it's got a bug in it. And then here's sudo, which we've been telling our customers to use and rely on for how many years, and it's got a 10-year-old vulnerability in it. And I have two thoughts. One is, okay, we all suck, because why didn't we all know about this? But two, that's my initial knee-jerk reaction. Two is, given that this kind of stuff is out there and is going to continue to periodically bubble wrap up,
Nice.
Vulnerabilities are here to stay. What else can we do about it? Because this kind of stuff is going to happen. And I've not read the technical details either, but I assume they didn't announce it until there was a fix for it.
That's correct. They actually gave props to the open source team,
For coming up with
Todd
one.
Miller, for the response to this, and what was fixed quickly.
So what will be interesting is, it's devastating in terms of what it can do, and anybody can do it, and the fix is available. So let's, fast forward to 6 or 9 months or a year from now, where we're going to be talking a news story about some major company getting popped, and it turns out they hadn't patched their sudo.
Yep.
Right. Well, and it was fixed in 6 days. So they sent the advisory on 113. The advisory and patches were sent on 119, and coordinated release happened on January 26th.
Well, and actually, out of curiosity, does anybody know what the fix? Not the details of the fix, but how do you install it? Because this is
Apt-get update. Apt-get upgrade.
Yeah.
you have to update the whole OS.
No, you just run the package updater, and it updates the sudo package for your
Whatever
Linux
is affected,
Yeah.
whatever the library is, and whatever it uses.
The patch for the sudo code, comes down in that fix for the distribution. Yeah.
So it's not. So it's something that you got to go do. It's not going to be something, I guess.
And you have to
presumably
sudo
newer versions.
Actually, you have to sudo apt-get update and sudo apt-get upgrade.
Oh, so anybody can do
All
it.
depends on who you're logged in as.
That's right, unless you're logged in as root. Yeah, it's true. It's true. Just a staggering amount of research, by the way. And I haven't digested all the technical details, but it kind of begs the question. And again, why I didn't think of it earlier to reach out to Qualis for comment on this. Like, what got you on this whole thing of because this is a really nuanced. This isn't like a
That's what I wanna
easily
know. What were they
understand,
looking
a couple of things hey, you can get root if you do X, Y, and Z. Like some of the container breakouts, shell shock, for example, and some of the other vulnerabilities that are privilege escalation on Linux are I can digest that. I've used Unix and Linux for a while. I get this is they're deep in the source code and going through multiple steps. So how did you find that and realize you were latching onto something that required that level of investigation? You kind of had this intuition that you were onto a privilege escalation exploit. Pretty good work.
See, I wonder if they were looking at something that was in the wild, honestly.
Yeah.
Because looking at how deep they're digging here, and they're doing ASLR bypasses with memory overriding of environment variables, with character return, strings that are very, very, very specific to a certain buffer length. This is super deep from an analysis standpoint. Usually you see this analysis when you are reversing something and going backwards. Going forward with exploit dev and how they're developing this and what they found, that makes me wonder if they were looking at something that was outside of this or trying to figure out what something else was doing in the wild.
Right.
And this is kind of a means to an end because, you said, this is in the weeds.
You wouldn't normally in systems troubleshooting be digging this deep into sudo. This wasn't someone that was there's a bug in sudo. Maybe I'll dig into the source code. This is oddly specific, Tyler, to your point.
Yeah. I'm curious to see what comes out of some of the kind of hypervisor level things that can happen, because a lot of those are going to be the ones the images that are the gold images for, maybe lower end cloud providers or things that are being auto deployed. Those are the things that aren't going to get updated as quickly. And those are the things that may have multi-tenant shared access, that if you were to be able to elevate and break out of something and leverage something like this, that's going to provide a lot of access to a lot more sensitive hardware. So I think if this is the case, there may be a lot more that this ends up providing attackers.
Well, and I'm reading through it as we're talking, and I certainly haven't digested all of it, but they're talking about the things that were particular about the code that created the vulnerability. And I assume that lots of people are now looking for this type of vulnerable condition, this type of code peculiarity in all the other utilities and
millions of lines of code
functions in Linux. And this is Linux. Does anybody still run any Unix variants and sudo's out there? And
it's interesting. This would be in is sudo come from the GNU project? Like, is it a GNU utility? I haven't. No, it's interesting. It is really kind of interesting and telling that we used some of these utilities all the time without fully understanding their origins, who maintains them, how they're maintained, where they come from. We know we use sudo to gain higher privileges on Linux and Unix systems. But where did it come from?
I don't know, but I mean, it's been around a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how long it's been around, but SU was probably there first. And
yes, SU was a standard.
SU is definitely a
POSIX that came from Unix and like POSIX standard build into Unix.
And I'm guessing here, but it's an educated guess that sudo largely came about as an alternative to setuid. Maybe not that as much as the realization that administrators shouldn't be running around doing everything as root.
I mean, there's another good RCE that came out too, the Oracle one, WebLogic, which I think has a lot bigger external presence for exploitation that has a lot of pretty juicy data. So that one's going to be interesting as well.
Just a little history on sudo. Robert Coggenshaw and Cliff Spencer wrote the original subsystem in 1980.
1980, so that's Unix.
Yeah, that was Unix. The code features were modified by the IT staff at the University of Colorado Boulder and the College of Engineering and Applied Science, including Todd C. Miller. The current version has been publicly maintained by OpenBSD developer Todd C. Miller since 1994 and is the person that they contacted to implement the fix, and has been distributed under the ISC style license since 1999.
It's crazy. How do you have time to do that? Maintain the main thing that keeps Linux and Unix systems safe.
Yeah.
For that long.
I feel ashamed being a nerd in Unix and Linux for that long and not understanding the history around commands that we know and love. Interesting. Anyway, sorry. Next.
EMOTET
was taken down until it comes back. That's what I'm finding with these big botnets and malware is that you take them down and they come back.
Well, I mean, they say they can come back, but so the EMOTET takedown was fantastic. There was the video in Ukrainian from the Ukrainian police and so forth, and showed the takedown, and the environment was typical Russian bloc, Soviet bloc style apartment that was a dump and and trash, and I fully expected when they pan over the desk where the computer was to see an ashtray overflowing with someone had been chain smoking cigarettes for a month. And
now give the Ukrainians a break, man. They've had a tough go at it for a really long time.
They have. But running Windows 7. These guys made millions from the ransomware from EMOTET and all the subsequent shenanigans running Windows 7. And
the developer or botnet herder.
If it's not broken, man,
don't fix it.
Yeah, right.
Don't mess with it.
Yep.
So it is interesting how they did the takedown too. The coordinated. This is almost scary, and I'm for all the good that this is doing, and I do agree with them handling it. It's becoming a little bit of a concern that if you don't fall within lines of whoever your overlords are, and maybe you just live on AWS servers, look at Parler. But these coordinated takedowns of infrastructure and or DNS sinkholing, where they just take over your DNS, like, well, how do you protect that from, like, if you thinking from the evil side as a criminal, how would you protect that? But thinking from a commercial side, like, I don't really trust any of these guys, and if I fall outside of what they think is appropriate, given politics change and climate changes and countries change, how do I protect myself so that they can't take that kind of stuff down just at, whatever they feel is necessary? Like, I broke Microsoft's EULA, so now international takedown. Like, how do you not do that?
It's a great question. Somebody interesting to ask would be somebody like, Dave Kennedy, perhaps. Because apparently binary defense was critical.
Assisting in the takedown?
The takedown of EMOTET.
Oh, you mean we had an excuse to bring our friend Dave on the show and we missed it? Well, we still have that excuse. We can still bring Dave.
I didn't find that out until this afternoon.
Yeah.
But you say coming back, apparently the command and control servers were in the Netherlands. And law enforcement officials in the Netherlands are in the process of using those command and control systems to send an update to EMOTET to self-delete itself. Like, I thought that was totally not cool. Like,
that's kind of illegal too, right?
I thought
like
so.
You're accessing someone else's system.
Yeah.
But if it's done, well, it's interesting. What begs the question?
You look at the legal end.
The legal end is interesting because it's not just illegal in the United States, right? You have legal precedents in other countries.
Right.
How does that converge together to ultimately be legal across the board? That's a really international law is really interesting in this case. Yeah.
Yep. So,
well, interesting, and also interesting how it applies to this case, I should say.
Yeah.
So the internet used to be your own servers, right? Like, you used to be able to have the internet and like connect in. Like, can you still run your own stuff and be safe now?
Well, if you're violating laws,
not if you use sudo.
If you use sudo, or if you're violating laws in all of these countries collectively, you're likely going to be a target for law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
But does the internet apply legally now, like with borders? Like, this comes back to like that old philosophy of like the internet was kind of its own thing. Now, are we starting to apply individual countries of where the hardware's at, where the virtual, people accessing these servers? Like, I think there's some interesting like theological things that has to get sorted out, and who controls and mitigates that. Like, when we start to have commercial companies handling, like Microsoft saying, yeah, we'll facilitate that and we'll just, we'll sinkhole everything and we can handle that DNS. Like, we're the name masters, so we can do that. Is that how the internet was designed to work? And like, are we past that point of like the internet is now what it used to be?
Yeah, deep questions. My story number 13, like crypto tools like Signal and Bitcoin, like, do they harm democracy? Do they help it? I mean, this is we're down a rabbit hole now of the most recent example is Parler. Maybe even more recent is Nmap, which was taken down because it was deemed bad by Google's what is their browser thing, the wrongful blocking of Nmap, which I thought was interesting and plays into this conversation, and not as much of a deeper philosophical level as Tyler wants to take us, which I don't mind going there, by the way. But with Nmap,
it just makes your brain hurt.
It does. But with Nmap, it's kind of interesting. Like, Fyodor was in a place where personally I've been as well. Right, your stuff's taken down. You've got a day full of meetings and recordings and like stuff to do, so you can make your living. But in the meantime, some big company has taken your stuff down erroneously. They don't know that. The big company doesn't know that, but you know that. All your users know that because they're like, hey, I can't.
Big company's automation did what it was supposed to.
Can't get to your podcast, can't get to the Nmap's great open source project. And Fyodor is the shining example of an upstanding citizen in our community and has done a great thing without question. And so Fyodor's like, you know what? I'm just going to tweet it out. Like, this happened and it shouldn't have happened. And hopefully someone on Google's security team who did see it uses Nmap and or listens to the Security Weekly network and goes, oh shit, our automation, it didn't mean to do that, and so we'll unblock you. My issue with that is not everyone has a Twitter account in the ear of the security community, like maybe we do,
millions of followers,
like maybe Fyodor does, right? That to go, yeah, that's how we're going to solve the problem. Because going through official channels, I mean, you're stuck in a rat hole and rabbit hole for God knows how long, but that there's other smaller projects that deserve the same level of response from the bigger companies to go, oh crap, we shouldn't have blocked that, right? But they're trying to go through official channels, and believe me, I've gone through the official channels and the non-official channels. The non-official channels are way more effective.
Yeah.
If you can get someone that's on one of these security teams that goes, oh yeah, we know Nmap, we know Security Weekly, so we'll unblock your stuff because you're good citizens. But I want everyone to have that same level of response to go, you're the XYZ person, like your project is legitimate, it shouldn't have gotten blocked.
Well, the problem is that everybody will, the official channels are that method because everyone's going to have some beef. Why'd you take
everyone that gets taken down is like, why'd you take it down?
Why'd you take my stuff down? Because clearly you violated the rules, but I didn't violate the rules. You're infringing on my speech.
Well, the rules are but not every case, but there are a lot of cases where I've been where I'm like, wait, what are the rules? And why?
For sure.
Why was I taken down? And you haven't told me why. So what are the rules? Does that mean you can just turn people? And
who dictates that?
But they dictate that because they're a private company, and people have really misused the whole free speech thing. Like they're a private company, and they can decide to remove you from the platform. Because if you read the EULA, the EULA gives them all the control in the world to basically take you down for whatever reason. Like they can be like, they define what inappropriate is. In other words,
right. So
do you have the access to do that otherwise now? Like, do you have the ability to have your own server, your own hardware, on an OS that is acceptable use to connect to an internet provider that provides you internet connection only, that would allow that's not going to take you down, that goes to a DNS that's also not bought out or owned?
Political affiliation aside, I think many of us, like myself, have put ourselves in the shoes of Parler to go, wait, what if the big companies have decided that whatever I'm doing is inappropriate for whatever reason? Again, political stuff aside, what if I come to well, hold on. What would Tyler, to your point, I got to find an ISP that's not going to kick me off. I got to find a registrar that's not going to kick me off. And I got to find some place to host my servers somewhere to provide DNS and basic infrastructure that people can't kick me off, right? And
isn't also relying on one of these people that just kicked you off. That's their largest customer. Keep going.
I think we go to that Eastern Bloc building somewhere with the Windows 7 system with an ashtray with a box of cigarettes. I think that's where Parler's ending up, is maybe in that building right next door.
But if you check Parler's DNS currently, it's in Russia.
It's in Russia.
I mean, and that's political discussions aside, I think that was one of the things that many people missed about that whole Parler thing, that Amazon did have a right to tell them to go away, because it's the same thing with the First Amendment rights. You can say anything you want.
Yeah, but you can't yell fire in a movie theater.
Right. No, you can say anything you want, but there are consequences. For saying
there's still laws.
Right. Yelling fire in a movie theater, and you cause damage and you cause people to die because of the stampede, then you now have to pay the consequences for what you said.
Sure.
Also, if you come in my house and start spouting language that I don't like, you have every right to say that. But it's my goddamn house. Right. Get out.
But also the First Amendment is for the government not to regulate speech, right? Not to impose on speech. Private companies now that have these platforms, they don't have to abide by the First Amendment in that sense, that you know what I mean? But there's still laws that if you're breaking the law, there's still a responsibility to uphold the laws in this country. And those are
the laws,
different
and
things.
They are private companies, seen as private entities, as private people by the law. And but back to the house analogy, if you come into my house and start spouting
Right.
a nonsense and I don't like it, I can ask you to get out of my house.
Yeah, but kind of similar to Amazon.
But they control fundamental
dude,
technologies, though, right?
You gotta
Like
fuck up.
DNS,
But
for
hold
example.
on, you gotta fuck up pretty bad for Amazon to kick you off AWS.
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
you
let's just be frank. Like, you gotta,
and you gotta fuck up pretty bad for me to tell you to get out of my
exactly.
house.
That's what I'm saying. They're kind of similar, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
But
yeah.
if they control something like a DNS, like the root DNS servers, right? Like when companies or ideologically a small sect of people control the fundamental technologies that enable the facilitation of something that is an open collective, like the internet, where we're talking like DNS.
Do they become more scary than the government?
but so
Absolutely.
So
I agree.
I'm finding
you can go back in the archives of Security Weekly and hear me say that. Usually after we've been kicked off of some platform for no good reason.
yeah. Now, see, I find that Tyler, yours with the analogy and that infrastructure, a little bit of a stretch in that Parler was never asked to leave DNS. Parler's DNS was never turned over. Amazon said, "No, get your servers out of my house." Like,
but
their
but
DNS all worked.
take Maribot or Emotet, right? Like
Okay,
take
well,
the bot.
but that's different. That's not Parler, right?
Correct.
But I think Tyler's point is like,
is it?
different. How different is it?
Parler was a platform for people to talk, and maybe the things that they said were bad.
Emotet
was
a network for people to commit crime, but Parler there was also
Emotet
crime
was not a
being-
network for committing crime. Emotet
yeah,
was the crime. Like,
I mean, it is crime, but is it crime in every country? Like, if you're operating that in a country, if that's again, I'm not advocating crime or botnets by any means. Like, I want to eliminate all those as much as anybody else. But at the same time, that fundamental, like, when you start to take over something like DNS and Sinkhole and like just, hey, we'll just take their IP space and then take their DNS and black hole it and route all their traffic to us and then take over the botnet. Like, at that point, like, that could be anything. Like, given someone thinks that you're breaking the law.
could be.
Yeah, but to do that, you have to have cooperation from law enforcement, and I think it begs a good question, Tyler. Like, what does that process look like?
Yeah,
I think we need some transparency.
we know what that is.
watching the
I think we
watchers?
do need some transparency to understand what that process looks like when there is an international crime being crime across international
think we know.
borders. I don't know the answer, but I have always assumed that when Microsoft does take down a botnet that has crossed international borders, that there is cooperation with law enforcement from all the relevant countries.
They were asked to do it by law enforcement. They just didn't say, "Hey, you know what sounds like a good idea? Let's fuck up Emotet today."
Yeah.
Bonk. No, they
That
were
there is
asked by a whole
But what
bunch
that-
of
but what
coordinated
that-
law enforcement.
I think that would be a super interesting interview to interview people that know the answers to those questions and
Yes.
ask them what that process is like. I'm assuming there is a process in place. I'd be curious to understand what that process is.
It's a subpoena. They broke the EULA, and Microsoft finds a loophole because their lawyers are freaking insanely good, and therefore they can get collaboration across all of the different people that need to be involved.
I love your
fairly
tinfoil.
straightforward.
I love your tinfoil
Probably the
hat.
other way around,
but
Tyler,
it's not grounded in complete fiction either, right? Because what if there are certain privileges that larger companies could have and leverage that they have because they are larger companies and do have those teams of lawyers? Can they get stuff taken down more easily than? And does that give them a competitive advantage? Yeah. There's lots of talk of breaking up bigger companies. Antitrust is a huge thing again, and those of us that have been in technology for over 20 years are very familiar with antitrust as it relates to Microsoft and many other companies. Yep. I don't know that that's the answer either. Is to break up. So you've got one Facebook today. Is like having 5 Facebooks really the answer? I don't know if that was the answer in telecom, but it's different. It's different. It's different than breaking up AT&T, right? Yeah. Anyway,
What's next?
Next.
we could do a whole show on just that.
I wanted to briefly touch on the whole Flash thing because somebody had an article about.
This is so. Let me just set the stage because I can't wait to get everyone's reaction on this one. So was it South African government?
South Africa. That's what
has
it was. Some other country
has this application that is like a form that you fill out, and I forget which what it's for, but we can
Diplomatic immunity.
Use
wait.
use your
Wrong
South
movie.
African Revenue Service basically has this form that you fill out, and it was based on Flash. And as we know, Adobe has basically neutered Flash, like they embedded it in the code. 10 months ago, there was like on this date, there's a kill kind of similar to taking down a botnet, right? Like they took down Flash in a very similar manner and said in this date. So the South African government goes, well, rather than paying a developer from Ukraine, perhaps very nominal fees to recreate this form in a modern JavaScript HTML5 application, which really wouldn't cost that much money in my assessment. They said, we're going to take a browser. We're going to use a pirated, is pirated the right term?
Yeah, technically, yeah.
Technically pirated version of Flash embedded in the browser, tune that browser so that it can only access this Flash application, and we're going to distribute it. And this is how you basically go fill out this form with the South African Revenue Service. And this was
South Africa's a bunch of hackers. Like they are some sysadmins.
It's a brilliant hack. I guess maybe.
So on the
brilliant at some level, it is very.
How many sysadmins have done this for their environments? Like
the ones responsible for the railways in China, same thing.
Yeah, it was a similar.
Some of the railways in China used Flash for doing train management and all that type of stuff. So they went and got a pirated copy of Flash and rolled back a little bit, and now the trains run, and they were down for like 16 hours because of this thing.
Right. Yeah, I heard that too, Larry. Yeah, now that you said
it was funny. That discussion came up just the other day when it happened in one of the SANS forums or SANS Slack channels, and my comment was, I've done enough pen testing against those critical types of services and looked at the protocols that are used in those systems that Flash is the least of their worries.
This is a problem. Technology refuses to die, and we've speculated this in the past that like Flash is going to refuse to die, and yet here's the evidence.
Yep. Jeff? So here's my problem with it, and it's a personal one. I have this printer next to me that's one of those really cool, scanner fax. Not that anybody faxes anymore. Copier.
Right, Tyler? That's an MFD.
Multifunction device?
Yep. Multifunction device, yes. And the application that I use on my computer, on my laptop, to manage it, mostly for copying stuff, for scanning things, which my family asks me to scan stuff all the time. Turns out I tried to launch it the other day, and I got this Flash. Weird image pop up. I'm like, what the hell's going on? I'm like, well, I got to reboot the system. Let me try it on my other laptop. Same thing. So I finally it was a Flash-based little app thing. So now I have no way of doing anything with this printer.
No, you can totally find the pirated version of Flash because
that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, I haven't looked. I mean, but it's out there. I mean, there's going to be use cases like this.
I'll send you one.
Yeah. Jeff, my question is like, how old is this printer?
The
fact that you have to think about it means it's outlived its expected lifetime.
No,
if you have to if you have to buy toner or ink for it, time to buy a new one.
I can still get toner and ink for it.
I know you can still get it, but it's probably costs more. The toner or the ink probably costs more than a new printer does right about now.
Absolutely. This was issued to me. I want to say, I suckered some company I worked for into getting it for me. I forget whether it was AT&T.
The fact that you forget.
It's probably 10 years. It's probably 10 years old.
Oh, good God.
But it still works.
I know, dude. That printer has outlived its lifetime by 10 years.
But that's the railway in China. Like, our systems still work, and they just happen to run Flash.
Yeah.
No excuse for the South African Revenue Service because they should have just updated their app. But now we're talking about a physical device that you have to replace. That's a different thing. But I think the negative is we're going to see this proliferation of people still pirating Flash for these exact use cases, Jeff.
Well, and it's funny. I did a prep call today for Security and Compliance Weekly with Wendy Nather. She's going to be on the show next week, Tuesdays noon Eastern. Mm-hmm. And we've been bringing her up off and on for I don't know how many episodes, talking about the cybersecurity poverty line, which is what we're going to have her come on and talk about. And so
it's one way to get a guest is to talk about the thing that they invented or an expert in so much that they're just really forced to come on the show to set the record straight and share, right?
Absolutely, and enlighten us. And one of the things we were talking about in terms of what kind of rabbit holes are we going to go down was the fact that she mentioned that she works for Cisco now. and Cisco apparently, and I met shoot, I'll have to message her. Apparently Cisco did some sort of study about companies and how often do they refresh their technology or something like that, or I forget what the details were, but the conclusion was companies that regularly refresh their technology tend to be more secure. It seems like a no-brainer.
Go figure.
But my problem with that was though, a lot of my PCI customers, and I think Paul, you've experienced this, because we've talked about, how many point of sale systems, self checkout systems were running on what's called 4690.
Yeah, 4690 OS. Yeah.
Merchants that are investing, God knows how many millions of dollars to put computers to replace what used to be a cash register in thousands of locations across the country. They don't want to do that every 18 months. They kind of want that stuff to last for 10 years.
Yeah. Well, even small companies too, small businesses, the point of sale system, Jeff, as you have experienced, it's very critical to the operations. I mean, so much so there was a new restaurant which has barbecue and brisket, which I can't wait to try. But the reviews I was reading was the service was bad, and they mentioned something about them having problems with their point of sale system. It underscores the point of how important those systems are when they make that initial selection, and once they get it working, like, don't change it, because if they change it, it could mean a huge impact to their business. People don't want to go and eat at that restaurant if they have to wait for an hour for food because they're having some kind of issue with the point of sale system, right? Also, Jeff, to your point, a problem with you've got thousands of stores, uplifting and upgrading or replacing your point of sale system is a huge undertaking and hugely critical to that business.
Well, it is. I mean, I had a merchant customer that I worked with for many years that was going through the process of, they knew that they were going to need to replace because they're running on XP back when XP was getting ready to go away, and they were planning on the replacement. They knew it was going to take them like 3 years to decide. Okay, we're going to replace it, and then to the point where all their stores had the updates. So, it's almost like you have to plan for the next rollout before you've rolled out the one that you're currently trying to roll out.
That was my first job as a programmer, Jeff. I lived through that. We had customers that, before I got there, they had bought systems and then they were looking to upgrade them. And I remember the developer. I mean, it was a huge project to get. Let's get all their products in. Let's get their software ported to the new platform. Like, it was a huge deal back then. Still a huge deal today.
And what's even worse is, I mean, I've had a customer relatively recently within the last year that was working on a payment application that would be running on a smartphone. And they were a typical engineering organization that had it was a 2 or 3 year project for a municipal transit authority. Handheld device to collect tickets and purchases on trains, and they had designed this thing for like a Samsung S4 or something like that. And when I was working with them, in the last year, I'm like, PCI's got this thing about unsupported operating systems, and this thing was versions old, and they hadn't even fielded it yet, and trying to figure out how to reasonably satisfy the unsupported operating system issue within PCI in a smartphone where those things really are like everything else, end of life 12 to 18 months. But with smartphones, they stop supporting them a whole lot quicker than like Windows operating systems, which get super double extended extra life support for God knows how long type of thing. It's a real problem. In fact, and not to bore you guys to tears, but the PCI Council every year they solicit what should we create a special interest group to dig into, what's a nagging problem topic that keeps coming up. They just happened to announce today that they're going to tackle is I guess in 2021 the whole issue of unsupported operating systems. And I haven't read the details, I just saw the headline, but I would wager that a lot of it's because so much of the payment industry and payment applications are moving to things like smartphones that you don't get 10 years of support
Yeah.
with the operating systems and the component parts. You get maybe 3 years. If you're lucky.
It's a dicey technology decision. And I mean, when I think about if you were running an older smartphone, older Android version for a very special purpose application, I wouldn't be so much concerned about like rogue apps, because I'm sure you could prevent people from installing new apps on the phone because it's a very special purpose. I'd be more concerned with the Bluetooth and Wi-Fi drivers that you can't update being an attack vector in that particular scenario.
Right. But, on the flip side, as I'm experiencing it right now, I'm like, why the frick do I have to replace a printer? Because I can't run the tool that runs the printer. There's nothing wrong with the printer.
Right.
It does all the things that and I don't use it that often. It's used more by the family, but it's becoming a dead weight now.
Yep.
Because the supporting application I can no longer run because it was written in Flash.
Yeah. Similar thing not that long ago, Jeff, in that I had a printer. I'd had it for I don't know how many years. I'd had it since I started consulting, and in fact, it worked so well that I bought one for my mom. And
so it was dot matrix.
Yeah, pretty close.
But it was the old IBM. What did they call them with the paper that was,
Yeah,
a plotter. It's like a plotter.
The line feed.
Plotter.
And, yep. The daisy wheel printers, and same thing. The printer came, new Mac, new updated version of Mac OS. No drivers available for the printer. Couldn't print to it. Couldn't scan. Nothing. I'm like, all right, it's time to buy a new printer. But I think I got 7 years out of the printer, and like the cartridges for the inkjet were becoming ridiculously expensive. I looked at like what it was going to cost for me to get the next set of cartridges for it, and it was as expensive to get those cartridges as it was for me to buy a brand new HP laser printer that did all of the same things.
And what I do is when I buy a printer, I buy one spare cartridge with it. And then, like you said, Larry, once you have no more cartridges left, as little as
time
we
to
print,
get a new printer.
time to get a new printer.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And for that printer, we were going through cartridges like every 3 months. I've had this printer.
Shouldn't you be able to refill the cartridges, though, Tyler? I think you lived that, right?
Oh yeah, you can refill cartridges.
You just got to learn how to hack the firmware on the.
It's so easy. It's scary.
Yeah.
And the reset methods are just dumb. And the really expensive ones that they charge you, thousands of dollars for these cartridges, literally have like low near field chips on them that just get flashed with an ID number of the count, and that's basically it. So you put some toner in there and flash it, and it's good to go.
Interesting.
Gotta love it.
How about Microsoft's VS Code?
Yeah.
Oh, that
one was fascinating.
Fascinating because there was all this fancy stuff in this article, and then I'm like, how is this person? Where is this in my list now?
I want to say it was towards the bottom.
The way he disclosed it too was just perfect. Like, does a commit with comments telling him not to delete this and to contact Microsoft's bug bounty team and response team. And it fell all within their safe harbor and responsible disclosure policies, and he was awarded a cash prize. Like, the dude literally commit code to the release branch of Visual Studio Code.
Crazy.
Because of an authentication token.
23, Paul.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Like, you read this article, and there's a lot of really cool technical stuff, and you're like, wow, that's really slick. But I'm like, the whole time you're reading, I'm like, but how did he like get code in the repository? And then you read the line towards the middle end of the article, and it's like, well, the actions checkout was executed in the step before the vulnerable workflow file is used. There was a GitHub token with write permissions in the repository, and that was the real. Had that token not been there, he wouldn't have been able to inject it or do anything with this. It would have just been a theoretical attack. Like, if I were to be able to get the token to be able to commit to this repository, I could pull off a really cool hack. But that was really the vulnerability in my mind.
Well, so the token was given out of order, so you could get a token as part of the workflow process. And so he basically set up the push, and as part of the process that happened for their CIDC pipeline and their workflow, that was out of order. So he was able to get a token as part of the workflow process, and then from there he had the push set already, and he was able to push that commit up to VS Code. And so it was basically if I remember right, there was an issue with the regex and one of the closing brackets, and then how or when the token within inside of the workflow of the push actually happened. That was not there was a workflow flaw.
Yeah, it was really cool.
So it was a CI/CD pipeline / business process failure.
Yeah.
Or logic failure,
failure,
probably is a better way to,
Well, a logic failure and a vulnerability. There was a command injection vulnerability, but like
in
getting
code,
to that was the more interesting part. Was getting to that, being able to execute the actual execution.
And then how he reported it. Like I thought that reporting, like in the commit comments, was just like that's pretty ballsy for one. And he was very careful about doing it legally with inside of their bug reporting. But there was no arrogance. It was just, here's the problem. Here's what I did. Contact me here and let's work it out. Like,
it was so slick, like they couldn't be mad at him. Basically,
no, yeah,
and it was responsibly disclosed.
It was, and it's an undisclosed amount, which usually means it's a higher dollar amount.
Interesting. But he deserves it. I thought it was a very ingenious.
It's clever.
Yep, and a lot of work was put into that, so he deserves it for sure.
So
and glad that he disclosed it, right, rather than someone infecting the supply chain in VS Code, where everyone writes their code, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a scary thing. That was that falls right within inside of how we've seen these supply chain attacks and how we've been talking about these supply chain attacks happening. This could have been a library, right? They could be doing a commit to one of the libraries that's shared across multiple software platforms. So it wouldn't be like SolarWinds. It would be like all of the code that utilizes a library that could be well beyond what SolarWinds is.
Yeah, it could. You're right. This could have been way worse. You could have injected yourself into other people's CI/CD pipelines and code repositories and software. Oh,
it would have been.
I'm glad he disclosed that. Yeah.
Are we ready to move on?
Yes.
Larry's number 6, the Google announcement about
that's a good one, Jeff.
The targeting of security research.
We kind of started on this. Yeah, we started on this and didn't come back to it.
Let's. That was the other one that I figured would be an interesting topic for the segment. And
this, I mean, I think attackers trying to get in the supply chain of vulnerability research, right?
Yep. Like for me, this was very much a hey man, I'm a security researcher and I've got this thing I'm struggling with. Hey, can I send you a project? Maybe you can help me with it? Because like I'm so close to ODay. Oh yeah, sure, totally. I open up the project and within the project is code you compile, which is the ODay, which compromises the system of the attacker.
I mean, on the attacker's part, it's pretty slick, right? Like if I'm after exploit code, I'm target the people who are looking for 0 days and developing exploit code. And I'm going to try and get in their system, software, and processes, and I want to get what they have, right? I mean, essentially, it's what it boils down to.
Yep.
So what's stopping them from targeting pen testers now, or pen test companies? Like we've been saying that for decades, I think. Like if I was an evil bad guy, I would be going after the people that are already breaking in and already have access that may not have good computer or sanitizing practices where hashes live on there, the whole attack plan, like reports for all the companies, how you got in, how you got to all the keys, like those things would be super useful attacking pen test companies or good security companies, right? So I think this just shows we have to be vigilant.
Optimistically, I like to think that some of that data is stale and not as useful because once it's reported, they're fixing it. And laughter now can ensue.
Wow.
What I thought was interesting.
You're new around here, aren't you? Damn. Must be nice to be the new guy and not jaded.
Talk about overly optimistic.
All the chatter I saw about this, because I saw it drop on Twitter whenever it came out a couple of days ago, and people going on and on about it. It's like, well, that's funny, because where I often hear the term security breacher is all the people are like, they're misusing the term hacker. We need to protect hacker rights because we're really security researchers. Like, okay, so they're targeting hackers. Hackers are targeting hackers.
Well, I've
And-
always thought that way with vulnerability data too. I'm like, well, but like by the time you gain access to it, hopefully someone's fixed those vulnerabilities. But as we all know, that's not true either. Damn it.
Yeah. It was a novel way of like the pre-build configuration files for like when you compile something. Like we use these all the time, and sometimes they get rather complex. Like, you know, drop this binary in this folder that then is generated another piece of code that's then generating documents from that are infected. Like those post-build and pre-build routines for Visual Studio or, you know, whatever compiling software you're using. Those can get pretty complex. So how often are you checking those pre and post build routines as part of your projects?
Well, it's interesting. It goes back to our previous segment with Dan about automating our workflow. When you're a developer, you're automating your workflow as much as possible. And oftentimes, I've been guilty of this too. I set up a workflow automation to be like, hey, when I build this project in PyCharm, for example, like JetBrains tools, which played into some of the other attacks. Their source code manager, what's it called? That came up in SolarWinds too, I think. Well, I forget what that was called. But in any case, it's, you know, hey, I gotta do this task when I do development over and over and over again. And you know what? I want to automate it. And inside of this task, like basically in my IDE, I'm like, every time I want to click the build button, I want to go execute this script. And it sounds like the attackers can inject something into those scripts that, like, every time I'm building my software, they're getting a copy of it. At least if I was the attacker, that's the kind of thing that I would go after, is to get into the exploit developers build process, in the build automation process, not so much on the CI/CD pipeline scale, but more on the IDE in the build process that are running on the exploit developers. Did I understand that correctly? Is that what they were after?
Yeah. And so it was executing code as part of the pre or post build compile, which is a great
as we know, you
persistence.
you debug that process until it works, and then you're like, good Lord, I can't remember all those commands and all those switches, so I got to put that in a script somewhere to go build this stuff, and that's, Well,
and in Visual Studio, it's even easier now. You've got, it's within inside the settings, and you can have that set for like all your projects to do certain actions.
Yep.
Or some of your projects.
PyCharm's the same way. Yeah, same thing. Yeah.
With inside that GUI, like no one's going and looking at that as part of
because you don't look at it, right? Once it works, like this is I set it up once, and then I want to think about it again because this is how I build and I want to focus on where is the vulnerability and how do I exploit it. I want to focus on writing the code. I don't want to focus on the build process, and I've been guilty of it too. I set that stuff up and I let it run for building my containers too. That's another get inside the containers because I'm building containers and deploying them. And once I get that one good build script done, then it's interesting how automation can be the enemy here, right? Automating that workflow. I've automated how I build my container, and then it goes through testing and all that other stuff. So I'm not really thinking about it. I'm writing code. It's building the platform for me to run that code on automatically, and I'm not really looking at that process. I'm looking at my code of the application and what it's going to do, not so much how that container is being built. When it goes and gets tested, it's being tested for functionality. It's really super hard to look for new artifacts that have been added into that build process that maybe have a backdoor in them of some kind. That's hard to look for. As much as we say there's vendors and tooling to look for that, that's really hard to identify.
See, and I think there's going to be a lot more of this. In fact, this was one of the things I was looking at this week, was trying to figure out what those workflows and processes are inside of each of the cloud technologies. Like as you're building like some of the Lambda stacks or the automated stand-up of a virtual machine, or deployment of a Terraform, like where do those Terraforms live? How often are they being audited? Are there logs and controls for those getting manipulated? Like if I was to break in, if I just put some code in a Terraform, every deployment that they use that Terraform for, I then get code execution and a shell back on. Like that seems like a great persistence mechanism and a pretty evil spot to have code injected. Mm-hmm. So I think there's going to be a lot more logging and a lot more validation of things that do automated tasks that's going to have to happen. There's going to be entire tools, I imagine, or products that actually just function around keeping track of automation and making sure the integrity of the automation is still intact. NAT slipstreaming, anybody?
Oh, this is one I didn't read. I meant to go read this.
Yeah, and when I saw this, I
I
was
messed
like,
with
wait
this
a
in
minute.
November.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, this wasn't new. I thought we had talked about this already.
This one's different.
Is it?
You did. Now that you say that, Tyler, you did mention something along
It is better too.
Can you distill it down? Because I didn't. I meant to read this and write it up, and I just missed it because I had too many stories.
Yes. So essentially, they basically are playing upon. They're basically saying that the attackers have seen this in the wild, where attackers are using NAT slipstreaming, which is essentially the ability to, from the outside, jump behind the NAT and gain access to a particular IP address or port via the NAT slipstream. That's kind of the vulnerability. And there's an interesting way they're doing this. This version is utilizing some of the data. I think it's application. What is it? Application level gateway, an ALG. Mm-hmm. So they're able to get behind by leveraging the victim's browser. Basically, the victim visits a website. The victim's browser has application a level gateway. From within inside the application level gateway, they're able to manipulate some of the packets or the packet headers for TCP and UDP that then allow them to bypass the NAT translation and gain a direct connection via those TCP or UDP headers to the device behind the NAT.
And that's from a browser?
Yes. Just by visiting, no user interaction, just by visiting a website.
Interesting.
And it's basically packet injection.
Like from JavaScript in the browser, I can inject packets? Mm.
Yep. So that's scary. Like, that's really scary because NAT is kind of the thing that we rely on to say that we are not directly connected to the internet, right? And we don't have like that direct exposure. And there's a ton of, like the last one, there was a ton of products, like big name products. I think Cisco, Juniper, the stuff I was looking at was on one of the other big ones. But the big name products, you could get NAT slipstream. You'd have to know an internal IP address and a port, which was kind of a nuance that was really hard to get by. But this one seems to be a little bit different, where they're relying on JavaScript and just either clicking a link or going to a site that sets up that ALG. And once that ALG is there, it becomes very, very interesting.
Yeah, I have to go back and read that.
Aramis was the one that found, or has the demo for the NAT slipstreaming.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, Aramis, that Simple Nomad. Well, Simple Nomad works there. Mark Lovelace, a.k.a. Simple Nomad.
Someone else we have to get back on the show.
Yeah.
I'm talking to them.
Yeah, you start to think about stuff that NAT protects, like, IP cameras, Bluetooth devices, ICS, like all of the things that NAT protects right now, like
every work from home environment due to COVID.
Oh my gosh. Like, this seems like a really bad. I don't think this got as much publicity because it's complicated to do. Like, watching the POC and like reading some of the code from the last one, like it was a little bit intricate for what you're trying to do, because you have to understand IP at a very, very low level, and then you have to understand packets and kind of how the new browsers and technologies are interacting with all three of those things.
But wait a minute. I mean, NAT's not a security thing, right? I mean, it was created because of the limitations of IPv4, wasn't it?
So if you have a port sitting behind a firewall that your NAT's protecting, like say you've got a local web server that only you can get to on your LAN side, if this NAT slipstreaming allows you to bypass the NAT, access that IP behind the NAT and the local web server that's operating inside of that local network.
It's like a reverse NAT to get to internal access.
That's not the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is you're saying we rely on NAT for security, but NAT was not designed for security.
That is correct.
Yeah.
It's more of a philosophical, rhetorical statement.
But it sounds like this is a reverse NAT in that.
Well, I think
so it's a firewall, right? Like, you're bypassing so NAT in general, like when they say NAT, like they're leveraging the NAT like the NAT functionality to get behind the firewall. So
Right.
you're basically bypassing your firewall.
It's a firewall
bypassing-
bypass more
It's a
than
firewall
an
bypass.
abuse of
So,
NAT.
so
Yeah,
if you think about NAT, and that if your cloud service wants to talk to something on the inside of your network, the connection has to initiate from the inside of your network to be able to open that stuff outbound for it to be able to communicate back to you.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's sort of what I see NAT slipstreaming doing, is that they're forcing something on the inside of your network, the browser, to create this request outbound on some other thing to some other service to allow that connection back in.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
So it's reverse NAT is kind of how I would
Yeah.
think of that. Yeah.
that's just my high level understanding of how that sort of works.
That's basically, so you guys remember back in the day when you used to do like the DDWRT, when an APT group was using DDWRT to put firewall rules in memory to get from a particular port to an internal port and then route that traffic back on a reverse shell, right?
Right.
Like that was the whole thing. You reboot it, no evidence. Like, our government may have used this a lot.
That was a thing.
That's
I remember that back in the
essentially
day.
what
yeah.
they're doing here. Yeah,
And it was
like
hard.
UPnP
But it was hard to
reverse.
pinpoint because, like you said, if you realize that the person would
Memory.
unplug the router and then all your evidence was gone. I actually did in instant response to a case where there were like something weird was going on, exactly what you were describing,
Yep.
and like I pulled apart the router, the firmware, and I'm like, there was
Got
no
nothing.
evidence.
Yep.
It was the perfect unatrib hard. It was all the unatrib infrastructure you ever needed.
Speaking of no evidence and like a ghost, what about your story number 2, Paul? The ghost hack.
Oh yeah. So I thought it was interesting that we, as pen testers, I think in social engineering, like to use the employee that's on vacation, right? Because we can, if you're using intelligence gathering methods, you can say, well, that employee's on vacation, right? Because you're like, oh, that's an employee of the
out-of-office
company.
message.
They're out of office. I visit their social media. They're posting pictures from Cabo, whatever the case may be. And you're like, that employee's on vacation. And we use that to our advantage. But I don't know that you folks have ever used. I certainly have not used this. I'm not saying that you should or should not. I think it's a concern for companies in protecting the security of their enterprises. But the attackers went after employees that had deceased because they realized that the processes for removing accounts from those that are deceased are different from those employees that have left. If you have an employee that left, and the article spends a lot of time talking about, when employees leave and they're disgruntled or they're fired and then disgruntled, you have a heightened stage of awareness because we've worked in IT in places, all of us collectively, I believe. When an employee leaves and they're disgruntled, the security person is the first person they go to be like, so we just fired Bill. And Bill was kind of pissed off at us.
Or more importantly, Bill is in the office in HR getting fired right now.
And we need to make sure all his access is removed because we have even if they had a feeling that person might be disgruntled, you had to wipe out their access, right? But if Bill were to, no one lives forever. If Bill were to, we always use the analogy, get hit by a bus, right? But someone dies, you don't necessarily go in and remove all their access because they can't leverage that access themselves. However, attackers did in this scenario because, and we've all seen this too, you use your own credentials to run processes rather than a service account. So you can't just go remove that person's access. And that's what they took advantage of.
See, I'm curious if they purposefully did this, where they seen an obituary, they knew where they worked.
It's true.
And then they went and tested things.
Oh, I thought you meant on purpose, like they assassinated Bill and then used Bill's access. That would be awful. That would be something the Russians would do. I mean, not to stereotype, but like I wouldn't put that past nation state.
That depends on if it was poison or you fell out of a window.
If it was poison, I would say Russians. Window would be more China, I think.
Yeah.
But attribution's hard. Like, would the Russians just push someone out of a window to make it?
Or would China
Make you think
poison
China.
someone to make it think it was Russia?
Or would they
Counter
insert the gas
disinformation.
through the window?
I associate China with pushing people out windows because I like to think that my technology from China comes from factories that have nets. Did you guys know this?
What?
Yes.
The factories in China, the working conditions are so poor that people jump out of the windows. In a lot of factories, they installed nets. So they land in the net, and then I don't know if they put them back to work or not. I'm just speculating, but they like put them back to
It's
work.
a liability.
So
They
I
don't
want
people
my
docking and
technology.
takes away
It's
from
a-
people
it's
My
a
taking it.
wife can't even have this
track.
conversation. I try to have this conversation with my wife. I'm like, you know the iPhone you're using? I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's one with nets. She's like, what are you talking about? And I described the scenario, and she's like, I don't know if I want an iPhone anymore. I'm like, no, I'm right there with you. Like, it's a terrible crime against humanity, but
But more importantly, they jump out the window and they land in the net. They actually have to crawl to the edge of the net now to jump off. So,
Right.
like, you really have to be committed.
well, I don't know what
I just take that too
level-
far?
I don't know what level the nets are, and I'm
I don't
told
know.
they put them
I
back to
think-
work after they land on the nets, which I
I don't think we can recover from that, so I think we should close. Personally,
it's a whole other segment for another show
Yep.
where our technology comes from and what the working conditions are.
Yep.
For sure. There was articles about Sonicwall.
You know,
Just
instead of nets, they should just use bubble wrap.
They could use bubble wrap. In China for stunts, they would use in Chinese kung fu
they
movies. They'd
should
use
issue
boxes,
bubble wrap
Yep.
uniforms.
empty cardboard boxes
Yeah.
is what they would fall in. But just a quick note on Sonicwall. There was speculation that it was a 0-day in Sonicwall's products that led to a breach of Sonicwall's infrastructure, which I'm not sure. Then there was the story when I grabbed the headline. It was former Lulzsec hacker releases VPN 0-day used to hack hacking team from 2015. That was not a 0-day. Sonicwall had patched that issue, and this person had released the exploit for that patched issue, which means it's not a 0-day. So don't believe all the headlines you read. And again, if you look at our show notes, it actually does say the original headline. When you go to the article, they have since corrected that headline. But what's interesting, when it ends up in the RSS feeds, you capture the original headline. And I've caught some people that have changed some headlines for various reasons because it ends up in RSS. There was an off-color headline that I had caught, and they had updated it, but I still had the original headline. And I'm like, how did you get away with that headline? Like, that was really... We talk about appropriate versus inappropriate. Like, this was an inappropriate headline. And they changed it. And I was like, well, I still captured your original one. And I'm like, I still think poorly of you for allowing one of your authors to have that headline. In this case, they did correct it, but it was not a 0-day.
Yep.
In any case, Sonicwall was in the news.
Yep. The other one that I loved, the Stack Overflow 2019 hack was guided by advice from Stack Overflow.
Well, I
Like-
think that people think that like hackers were complete experts in everything.
Oh, no.
That's not our skill. Our skill is
We can Google better than you.
we can Google and learn these new technologies enough to hack them to accomplish our goals. and so the person that hacked Stack Overflow used Stack Overflow. This was the JetBrains one.
Yeah.
To learn about the JetBrains CI/CD software enough
And
to be able to
TeamCity.
escalate. What is it called? TeamCity.
Yep.
To learn TeamCity enough to do that, but they could track this person's access to see what articles they were reading on Stack Overflow, which were, how do I use TeamCity again
Yeah.
to be able to accomplish my goals? And
Yep.
again, it comes back to
We're not-
and we don't know
we're not
everything about
smarter.
everything. We just know how to learn
Yeah.
up really fast.
I
Right?
also
we
program
have
in Stack Overflow.
imagination and curiosity.
Yes,
You know,
agreed.
What
Jeff.
happens if you do that?
Yep.
You said to do it this
Oh,
way, but
I have an
wanna do
account
it
on
this-
TeamCity. Like, how do I use that? I gotta go.
Yeah, I gotta go
Stack
figure that
Overflow
out.
and figure it out.
Yep. Yeah. See, I also program in Stack Overflow.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
In any case, well, thank you everyone for listening and watching to this edition of Paul's Security Weekly. Larry, take us out.
Over and out.